We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. Welcome to At the Inkwell Denver. And tonight we are celebrating Jenn Givhan and her recent novel release for Jubilee. We also have special guest, yes, special guest Cadwell Turnbull as a special guest and reader tonight as well. I want to give a quick hello and shout out to Monique Antoinette Lewis, who is the founder of At the Inkwell. Monique is joining us tonight from France, where it is 1:30 in the morning-ish. So thank you, Monique, for joining us tonight.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here to support Jenn and Cadwell.
So I'm going to go ahead and post the links for Jenn and Cadwell's books where you can purchase them through Bookbar. Bookbar is sponsoring the reading tonight, and Bookbar is a local bookstore and wine and now a cocktail bar. We now have a full cocktail menu located in Denver, Colorado. And we love supporting local authors and just authors in general like Cadwell and Jenn, and we're very happy to be able to sell their books and help support them. So I'm going to actually turn it over to Jenn to do a quick introduction, and then I'll go ahead and introduce the readers.
Thank you so much, Hillary and Monique and Cadwell, for being here tonight, and everyone in the audience for coming and joining us. I wanted to put this together with Bookbar and At the Inkwell and Cadwell because Jubilee is a magical real book that deals heavily with themes of surrealism and looks at traumatic events, difficult events, painful events through the lens of magic. And I've been following Cadwell, who is my press brother at Blackstone Publishing. And I met him at a reading a couple of years ago and came in contact with his writing, which is also very magical, speculative fiction that deals with difficult themes of cultural, familial, social trauma through the lens of, it's speculative in science fiction, but I see it as magical realism as well. And so I wanted to have this night to celebrate Cadwell's book, No Monsters, No Gods, that has just been released with Blackstone Publishing, and Jubilee has just come out in paperback. So it's a birthday month for both of our books with this, wonderful writer whom I see as a dear friend and colleague. So I'm so excited to be here, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Jenn. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll introduce Cadwell and he will read for a bit. And then Jenn will read, and then we'll do a Q&A. So Cadwell Turnbull is the author of The Lesson and No Gods, No Monsters. His short fiction has appeared in The Verge, Lightspeed, Nightmare, Asimov Science Fiction, and several anthologies, including the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2018 and the year's Best Science Fiction and Fantasy 2019. His novel, The Lesson, was the winner of the 2020 Newcomb Institute Literary Award in the debut category. The novel was also shortlisted for the VCU Cabell Award and longlisted for the Massachusetts Book Award. Turnbull lives in Raleigh and teaches at North Carolina State University. Please welcome Cadwell Turnbull.
Hey, everybody. Before I read from the book, I'll be reading from No Gods, No Monsters. I wanted to thank Jenn for inviting me. I was really touched and honored and really excited to be doing this with you, my pressmate, Hillary at Bookbar. Thank you so much for sponsoring this and spotlighting our work. Monique, thanks for staying up so late to support us. Really appreciate it. And so and thank you for anyone that's in the audience that has showed up to support us. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. Yes, I was going back and forth about where I should read from, what would be appropriate for this. There's a part that I want to read from, but it's a little bit creepy. Is it okay? I'll go. Okay, all right. All right, I'll read from chapter 8. All right. 3 days after the funeral, Lena comes back from work to find Ridley sitting in front of his laptop at the dining room table wearing his big over-the-air headphones. When she enters, he looks up, tucks the right ear pad behind his ear, and mouths a noiseless "Good night, my love." Lena can hear the voices coming from his headphones, another Zen collective meeting. She smiles, mouths "shower," and goes down the hall to the bathroom. She undresses and hops in the bath and takes a quick one, then spends several minutes standing in the tub, letting the water drip from her fingertips. The door is slightly ajar to let the steam out, so she hears when Ridley gets up from the table and stomps down the hall. The door creaks open. She rolls the shower curtain back just enough to see him poke his head in. "You're home early," he says. "Bad day?" "No, just not a good one." He slips into the bathroom and stands by the light switch, giving her the silent "go on." She sighs but relents. "Our coworkers stayed pretty much out of my way. They asked how the funeral went, but didn't pry about Lincoln. I did my shift at information, a few out-of-store book requests, and the usual stuff. I tried to be friendly, smile at the regulars, but I was off and no one bought it. And so they let me leave. Told me if I wanted, I could try again tomorrow. So not too bad, not too good." He leans his head back against the wall. "And will you be coming in tomorrow? I'm supposed to do the afternoon shift." Lena shrugs. "Maybe." She motions for him to give her the towel, and he pulls it down from the hook and hands it to her. As she dries off, she changes the subject. "How was the meeting?" "Same old. They want the fall retreat to be 3 days, but I'm trying to get it down to 2. He looks meaningfully at her. Lena wraps a towel around her and steps out of the shower. "Take the 3 days," she says. "I'll be okay." "You sure?" When she nods, his shoulders ease just a bit, and he takes a breath. "So is there any news on the investigation?" Lena grunts and leans on the sink. "I shouldn't have asked." "It's okay." Lena shakes her head. "Nothing. No mention of the video either." She doesn't want to admit it, but she feels tired. She wants it to be over. All the anger she wants to feel has been sucked out of her by the whole ordeal. "Can we just go to bed?" she asks. "I want to be held. I don't want to talk." Ridley gives her a sad smile. "Okay, my love." She gets dressed in her shorts and sleeping shirt and gets into bed. Ridley is there waiting for her, and she snuggles up against his shoulder and whispers, "You ever feel like there's a world beneath this one?" "What do you mean?" Ridley's breath rises and falls, his heart beating steady as a drum. Lena struggles for the words, like we are a speck on some larger thing that we only catch glimpses of. He hesitates, then asks, "Is this about the investigation?" "I guess, but more than that." She sighs. "I don't know. Never mind." Ridley makes a sound as if he's going to talk again, but doesn't. Lena snuggles deeper into him and he kisses her on the temple. He keeps his face to hers so she feels his breath on her. This is reassuring. She's feeling shaky and needs his steadiness. She tries to settle the matter in herself, but her mind frets on. She can't tell what she knows from what she doesn't, what she wants from what she only thinks she wants. Lincoln's toxicology report returned inconclusive, but that still doesn't explain why he was running through the street naked. Does she want people digging into his past, unearthing all the ugly, unsavory moments of his life to discredit him, diminish his humanity? She says she will fight for him, and if she decides not to fight, will it be to spare him that disgrace or to spare herself? Will it be a gift or just another betrayal? And if it is a bit of both, how much of each is permissible? Where is the line that would damn or redeem her? And shouldn't she know? Shouldn't she have the ability to unearth the truth of her own heart? This is only part of what she wants to say to Ridley. The other part feels too strange, too terrible, too nihilistic to say out loud. She's feeling deep inside herself that none of it matters anyway. None of it matters because none of it is real. An image comes to mind. She's a ship, and so is everyone else. A cluster of ships on a dark sea. They are all packed tightly together for protection. But it is futile because at any moment, some black hand will pull one or two or all of them under, and everyone will see it, but no one will know what they're seeing or what to do about it. Not just dying, but something deeper than dying. The place that dying comes from. The vast and heavy nothing at the bottom of all things, returning to claim all things. Everything, her life, Lincoln's life, the movements of every life, is the mere useless stirrings on the surface of that nothing. The nothing is real. They are not. The thoughts persist. Riley is asleep now, and the quiet drumbeat of his heart keeps time as Lena's consciousness bobs along with no destination. Her restlessness dulls to the obsessive thoughts of someone on the verge of sleep, fighting against it with a relentless anxiety. But eventually, the thought turns to static, anxiety softens, and without even realizing it, Lena inevitably slips beneath the tide. Lena is on the subway platform for the Red Line to Alewife. The train is just arriving. She's standing just beyond the yellow line, where you're not supposed to stand. The hot wind hits her face, pushed ahead of the train as it comes through the tunnel and into the more open space of the station. It screeches to a stop. The double doors open with a clamor. Lena steps through. It is late. Hardly anyone is in the subway car. She takes her seat across from a man asleep under a dirty child-sized blanket. She doesn't recognize him right away, and once she does, she spends the next few minutes staring at his sleeping face. A stop goes by, then another before her brother opens his eyes. The action is slow, as if he were in his own bed, stirred awake by a lover. His eyes focus on hers, but with no recognition. She may as well be a stranger. Everything is hyper-real, vibrant. The textured face, the yellow and bloodshot eyes. His skin gleams with days of grime. His forehead has a smudge of dirt. His cheeks are cratered with pockmarks. At the next stop, someone sits near Lena, but they are out of focus. The hyper-reality of Lincoln sucking the reality from everything else. What? You gonna take me home? As always, he says this as if they've been talking all along. If you'd let me, she says. To her own ears, her voice sounds as if the volume had been turned all the way down. I got a place. Lena looks at the weather-worn duffel bag at his feet, the child's blanket caked with dirt that he's using for warmth. Please come home with me. Admit it, he says. This time, Lena doesn't lie to herself. She knows what he is talking about, has always known. She thinks of saying, how could I know? Or I'm sorry, or I didn't see anything. You should have told me something was wrong. A dozen more answers present themselves, all of them terrible. Finally, she chooses the truth. I knew something, but it scared me. He laughs, that same laugh that has no joy in it. It turns to coffin. Then she notices that a darker patch on his covers is spreading. Was that there before? And with the logic of dreams, she remembers that he's been shot, that he's dying. The world around them suddenly dissolves until it is just them. And then even Lincoln is fading. Almost simultaneously, another thing happens. Her brother is peeling, slowly at first, quicker now, his whole body turning inside out from the dark wound. Inner flesh and fat expose themselves, the sound of it tearing at her eardrums. And then the space between them starts seeping into the black hole. She feels herself pulling apart too, strand by strand, the scream in her throat sucked out of her and into him. She is reaching her hands up to her neck and mouth, where she finds nothing. A gaping hole where all her bits are spilling out into the open air. Lena gasps awake. Her nightshirt is drenched in sweat. Around her, the room lies dark and silent. She puts a hand to her chest and takes enough slow breaths to settle her heart. It's only after she relaxes that she has the feeling that someone is in the room. She doesn't have a reason to think this. There's no evidence other than the feeling. But then a voice comes, hovering just above her head, a whisper. Do you want me to get the video for you? It is a woman's voice, sweet, not at all threatening. Lena is too stunned to speak. I'm just as shocked as she is. No one is there. No one has been there. I can get you the video, the woman continues. Show you what happened that night. Do you want to know what happened that night? The voice sounds Caribbean. Lena has family from St. Lucia, and the woman's voice sounds like that, but also different. I recognize the accent because I've heard it all my life. It isn't St. Lucian, it's St. Tomian. This woman, whoever or whatever she is, has a background similar to my own. I can find almost anything, the voice says. The world is filled with secrets I've found. This is just a small thing. I want it, Lena hears herself say. Her right hand is inching toward the lamp next to her bed. What will you do with it once you have it? The voice asks. It's closer now, right in her ear. Lena trembles. I don't know, she says. I'll know once I have it. The thought occurs to her that she has just given her soul to the devil. What do you want in return? Nothing at all, the voice says. Give me a day, Lena flicks on the lamp. And somehow this is worse. To see an empty room in the light. Finally, she screams. Thank you.
Thank you, Cadwell. That was so good. Again, you can buy Cadwell's book. I did drop the link in the chat if you're interested in hearing more. So thank you, Cadwell. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to our feature tonight. Jennifer Givhan is a poet, novelist, and transformational coach from the Southwestern Desert and the recipient of poetry fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts and Penn Rosenthal Emerging Voices. She holds a master's degree from California State University, Fullerton, and a master's in fine arts from Warren Wilson College. She is the author of 4 full-length poetry collections, most recently Roses Einstein, and the novels Trinity Site and Jubilee. Her poetry, fiction, and creative nonfiction have appeared in The New Republic, The Nation, Poetry, Tri-Quarterly, The Boston Review, The Rumpus, Salon, and many others. She's received New Ohio Review's Poetry Prize, Phoebe Journal's Greg Gummer Poetry Prize, the Pench Journal Poetry Prize, and Cutthroat's Joy Harrow Poetry Prize. Jen would love to hear from you. You can go to her website at jennifergivhan.com, and you can follow her on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter for inspiration, writing prompts, and transformational advice. Please welcome Jenn Givhan.
Thank you so much, Hillary, for that beautiful introduction. And Cadwell, your reading gave me chills. Thank you. I loved it. Okay, so I'm going to read tonight. Actually, I'm going to start out with my protagonist, Bee, and her brother. So we have that parallel commonality as well, writing about sisters and brothers. So I think all you need to know, this is coming in chapter 1, is that this is called The Night Water, the bridge. And Bee has been driving throughout the night. And now we're going to see what she does when she gets to her brother's house. Maddie's porch light shone against red bricks at the end of Woodland Street. The natives of Santa Ana pronounced it like the guitarras Santa Ana, with a Spanish accent, all one word. But the streets had English names like Baker, Treeline, or Moss, names that conjured up forest images, though there were no state parks in Santa Ana. At Tia Lydia's in the ritzy beachfront section of Orange County called San Juan Capistrano, 20 miles away, all the street signs were in Spanish, and Tia's friends pronounced them funny, making Papania sound like Camp Vanilla. Bianca's legs ached. but not from driving her stick shift all night. She pitched into the driveway behind Space Dog, Maddie's nickname for the silver Nissan Sentra he shared with Jandro. She yanked the parking brake and released the clutch, forgetting she was still in first gear. The car lurched, then died. Shit, she hadn't done that in years. Not since Dad had taken her out to the country beside the irrigation district and vegetable fields and taught her how to drive a stick, because a girl should be able to do that kind of thing for herself. Exhaustion settled like powdered dirt under her chest and shoulders. She fought to keep from resting her head on the steering wheel. What would Maddie think? She pulled down the visor and checked her face in the mirror. Her forehead and cheeks glimmered fever pink, slick and shiny with sweat. The bluish pool of bruises had yellowed to soggy hairs across her cheeks and chest. Her dark hair matted in frizzy curls around her face. Her ass and inner thighs throbbed. The pad in her chonies clung hot and sticky against her skin. Her stomach hurt. But she was at Maddie's. He would take care of them. He always had. She glanced toward the house. She wasn't afraid, despite Santana's reputation. The neighborhood was safe, though most people assumed otherwise. You live in Santa Ana, people asked, wide-eyed. Isn't that dangerous, especially for you guys? Maddie and Jandro shook their heads. When they'd moved in, the handyman across the street had welcomed them, offering to fix up the place. Did they need help pulling weeds, with plumbing? Could he park his work van in the double driveway they shared with the neighbors, since the house next door was vacant? Maddie and Jandro were fine with the firecrackers every holiday, the mariachi music weekends, and the avocado tree lobbing its fruit onto the grass in their backyard. And the neighborhood was fine with them, the mariposas and the red brick house at the end of Woodland Street. Bianca pressed chanclas to cement. A shockwave of cramping curled her over. Knees buckling, she hunched, hands to thighs. She could have been a leaf in an electrical storm, crinkled and burning. Once the painful jolts released her to the dull, steady drum that had replaced her body, she pulled the handle and the front seat swung forward. She reached back to unbuckle Jubilee, pink and fuzzy in a bunny-eared romper. Kanga cocked her unclipped ears and wagged her stump of a tail. Earlier that morning, back in the valley, Bianca had balanced atop a lawn chair on the backyard porch of her empty girlhood house, and then wrapped a cord around her neck and hung the slack around a patio post. She'd stared at her dog. She'd willed herself to kick the chair, to do something besides stand there wobbly in bare feet with the cord dangling down her chest. She'd closed her eyes and prepared herself to fall. But Kanga had barked and barked until Bianca climbed down and knelt on the slab of unfinished patio cement, still bleeding between her legs. She hugged Kanga's brown neck and cried into her fur. Then she remembered Jubilee. She'd broken herself into pieces for Jubilee. Come on, girl, she said to Kanga. To Jubilee, we're at Uncle's house. Jubilee didn't blink or cry, but Bianca soothed her anyway. Sana, Sana, she whispered, patting the pink romper and resting the soft body against her shoulder. Bianca padded up Maddie's porch steps and rang the bell. Kanga barked. No one came. She rang again. This time, heavy footsteps across the wooden floor. Maddie had woken up. Jandro nearly floated when he walked, his petite frame almost hovering, a slender ghost gliding on the tip of his own long white beard in the Remedios Varo painting. But Maddie was solid as sculpture. The curtain rustled. Maddie peeked out the door's glass window. Bianca tried smiling, but her face wouldn't oblige. Locks unchained, unclipped, and the doorway flooded with warm yellow light, revealing Maddie, her massive older brother, his black hair sleek rumpled, his dark eyes tired and confused. He was technically her half-brother through Mama, but Bianca would have punched anyone who said so, like she punched that bitch Vanessa at the Catholic school who called Mama a whore. She'd said ho for having kids with two different dads. Maddie was her full brother. Bianca, barefooted and gym-shorted, Maddie stared at her. Are you okay? She nodded, tears landing on Jubilee's fuzzy hood. His eyes narrowed into a frown. Is that a baby? Bianca nodded again, unsure whether he'd be loving or judgmental. Oh my God, come in. He reached for her arm and led her into the house. What happened? He pulled her into his wide body for a hug. Jesus, you're burning up. She tried to speak, couldn't. Here, he said, leading her to the couch, let me hold your baby. He reached for Jubilee, but Bianca couldn't let go. She hadn't slept for days. She must have looked crazed, a La Llorona out of the waters, stealing dreams. I'll hold your baby so you can rest. She choked out a sob, letting him take Jubilee as she wobbled backward, landing on a couch that reminded her of the borrowed one she'd been bleeding on for 2 days in the empty house for sale 200 miles away. But soft and beige and beckoning, this one whispered safe, whispered let go. Her eyes fluttered. Maddie said, wait, what the hell? His voice reminded her of a flashing siren. It sounded an alarm, something cold and blacktop and ugly. She squinted, willing herself not to fall asleep. Was something wrong with Jubilee? She tried opening her mouth to speak, but her tongue scraped sand. She'd become a noiseless womb. Mommy's here, she thought of saying, but she couldn't recognize her own thoughts. Shit, Bianca, what's going on? He seemed repulsed by Jubilee, holding her away from his body unnaturally. Was he angry Bianca had stayed in the valley with Gabe, then come home with Gabe's baby? Maddie had always hated Gabe. A childhood of abuse had given Maddie a sixth sense that Bianca hadn't developed. Where she trusted everyone, he trusted no one. Yet surely Maddie would forgive her mistakes now that she was here. She'd come home. Hug her, she tried saying. The words wouldn't form. Hold her tight. It's calming. Bianca, what is this? She closed her eyes. Maddie's living room swelled and shrank. A lung, breathing her in, breathing her out. Jandro, Maddie yelled, come help me. Something's wrong with my sister. Jubilee was safe. The flash flood was gone. The arroyo was dry. Bianca was a lungfish, drowning. Jandro, get my phone, I need help. Hail Mary, full of grace, switch off the light and grant me peace. And the light switched off. I'm going to skip over just a couple of sections and come to the end of this, this chapter. At some point, a therapist named Dr. Norris came in and evaluated her. In what sounded like something from an absurd Monty Python movie, he explained to Mama and Maddie that Bianca was in shock. She'd need a low dose of clozapine to start, antidepressants, and a weekly therapy session with him, but she wasn't a danger to herself or anyone else, humming Simon and Garfunkel and so on. She wasn't a danger, so she could go home. Bianca heard him. She heard them step into the hallway so they could ask their worried questions without her hearing. She heard anyway. She knew what they thought was happening. She knew what they thought. But here's what she saw. Once upon a time, there was a girl child, a brand new girl child, smiling, so innocent, so new. Her mama held her tightly and she was safe. The end. After all, Jesus rose again, didn't he? And his mama must have held him, Mother Mary in a teal robe, clinging to her child, Pietà turned beautiful, restored to babe in arms. Bianca's daughter had returned, her Jubilee, and she wouldn't let her go. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. That was beautiful, beautiful language. Yeah, I could definitely get lost in both of you and Cadwell's readings for sure. That being said, at this point, we'll go ahead and open it up for Q&A. If you have a question, and this sometimes puts people on the spot to think of a question. So I'll just say if you have a question or a statement, please feel free. I'm going to go ahead and open up the Q&A. So if you have a question or want to comment or anything, say anything to Jen or Cadwell, go ahead and just drop it in the Q&A. And while we're waiting for questions, I'll ask a question of Jen and Cadwell. What was it like writing these latest novels, these newest novels for you both? What was the process for you, and how was that perhaps different from your other novels?
So the funny thing is for me that Jubilee is my most recently published novel, but it was actually the first one that I wrote. And so I started it when my daughter was a year old, and I wrote it during the first draft during NaNoWriMo. And I would put my daughter like on her little boppy pillow across my chest so that she could do her first early morning nursing at 5 in the morning. And I would just get started on this book that I'd had in me to write, since I was about 16 years old. I knew that I was going to write this story, and I was 27 when I started it. So it had been a decade just kind of bubbling up in me. And I finished it. I wrote the whole draft, the first draft, in a month. And then it took, a good 7 or 8 years before it actually came up. Well, actually, no. Before it came out into the world, it was 10 years, because that was in 2011 and it's now 2021. And so in the meantime, I started writing another book, Trinity Site. And then that's the one that I sent out to my agent, and she bundled both books together and sent that off to Blackstone Publishing. And so Jubilee, the one that like I really needed to get out, out of me and into the world, that's the one that came writing on my second book, Skirt Tales, into the world. So I've had to stay really tenacious and just ferociously, I was going to say positive, but it's not positive, hopeful, ferociously hopeful for Jubilee. And I've had to fight for her really every inch of the way. And so, she's an uncanny creation, and she falls sometimes into that uncanny valley. She's based on the idea of reborn dolls that are made in the likeness of children who have been lost, passed on, or maybe grown up, and parents want, a reminder of their children. And so, she falls into this uncanny valley for a lot of people who have a lot of connotations when they think of dolls. And so I've had to fight for the beauty and the grace and the hope that Jubilee represents. But, it's been worth it. And I'm so grateful for you all being here celebrating her with me.
Okay, I suppose I'll answer the question too. So my first book took me several years to write. It took me, I think I started when I was 25, and it wasn't published until like 7 or 8 years later. This book I wrote in a year and 8 months. It was supposed to be a year, but partly because the big reason why is because I had pitched it, and I signed a contract for it to, contracts is the reason why second books are challenging. And so I pitched it as part of a series, and I worked on it over that year, but I was also at the same time touring for the lesson. And so that first year or so was bumpy. I was writing and then trying to write all the time, hitting blocks all the time. And then the second part of that journey was a little smoother. And, I would say by the summer before I eventually turned it in, I think 3 months before I eventually turned it in, I had finished a draft, and it was a hot mess. And so then I spent, the next 3 months working it over before having anyone at Blackstone see it, because I was kind of embarrassed. But it, by the time I turned it in, I was like, this is all I can do with it. I really need the guidance and the work with an editor. And so, and that was also great as well, being able to know that I'd done so much work, but I also had someone that I had worked with previously with the lesson that I trusted, that would be able to, be a partner in making it and creating it and getting it to where it needed to be. That's my answer.
Great
That
answer.
resonates so much with me, Cadwell. for my third book, because that I had signed a 3-book contract with Blackstone for Trinity Site, Jubilee, and then my third book, which is coming out next year, River Woman, River Demon. And so I wanted to say this, and then I had a question for you as well, because in my third book that I had a contract for, and I knew that I had support and had my Blackstone family and my editor, I felt like I was able to take some more of the creative risks that I had within me, right? And like challenging some of the wisdom, or, so-called, wisdom and advice that I've heard in my MFA program and things like that, that I was like, no, but I really want to do it this way. And, in the past, people were like, are you sure? And I really, because I wanted to get published, I might give in, and not do it that way. And I've been reading your newest book and noticed that you've taken a lot of creative risks and done a lot of things that we might hear in an MFA, like switching point of view and things like that. Should you do that? So I just wanted to ask you as well, like, did you feel like you took a lot more risks in this particular book, in your second book?
Right. Yeah. And I should say too that now I'm working on the third book, my third book, and I'm still feeling the same. It's like, because it's the second book in a trilogy, it feels like the second book redux. So the third book still feels like the second book. And there's, I'm having a lot of, anxiety about like, well, I set all of this stuff up. I need to pay this off and escalate, do all of the right things in the second book. So I'm going through it right now. And so solidarity. To talk about that, yeah, it's, very occasionally I check to see how people, regular readers have been responding to the book, and I'll go on Goodreads. I'm not supposed to, and this is one of my rules as well. But I'll cheat. I'll go on there and I'll read some reviews, and often enough I've gotten people's response, in confusion with some of the POV switching and the time movement. And there's a lot going on in the book. There's a lot of POVs. There's a lot of there's a lot of it moves from third to first person occasionally in weird moments. It happens all across time and space. And so, I'll sometimes read that that's bewildering, or that's confusing. And I had a lot of concern and anxiety about that. But I think that when I was mapping out the story and I was thinking about, well, what's the story I want to tell? All of those things had to be, and it was one of those things where I'm going to try really, really hard to make this work and hope that people are on board. And so it's really satisfying when people do come on board and people get it completely. And I'm a little sad when people are like, oh, what just happened? The interesting ones that I've gotten are, I love this, I'm still confused. And that to me is like, okay, I think that because I see this as a trilogy in the truest sense, that this is part one and there'll be a part two and a part three. I feel like, well, this is just the first third of the story. And my hope is that with the next third and the other third, that people will be in it long enough to understand the rules of what it's doing or what it's trying to do. And, people will, dig in and get lost in it. I constantly am breaking rules that I learned in the MFA. And the way that I try to justify that in my own mind is by reading a lot and seeing how other people will break similar rules and seeing if I can use some of that, and then I can invent something that feels like it makes sense within the world of the story. I'm full encouragement for breaking rules.
I love that. I love that so much. I'm gearing up to write my fourth novel. I'm going to try to get as much using the momentum of NaNoWriMo in just a few days as November begins. And it's also going to be magical real. So I love what you were saying too about this is the way the story has to be. And I hope that people can just dig in and learn the rules that I've created, right? I love that so much. That feels really inspiring for me as a fellow speculative fiction writer. It's that like we get to break the rules and create our own. And I think that's the joy for me and why I wanted to invite you onto this panel with me, because people don't always get it. We're writing about tough issues, trauma and pain and, violence, but we're doing it through magical realism, and people don't always get that. But, I think that when they really invest the energy to understand it, right, it can just transport you completely, and it's transformational in a way that nothing, I love reading across genres, but magical realism and speculative fiction for me take me to, really a transcendent place, like that I imagine, that's heaven, that's the other world, that's like stripping the veil, and so I'm really loving your book, and that it's doing that as well.
Yeah, I like what you said about stripping the veil. It's definitely speculative fiction, magical realism captures that feeling. It's a thing that you can do and play with in other genres, but the way that you can kind of stretch reality and play with reality and turn things on its head, and you have permission to do so, really comes closer to what I feel sometimes living in the world than just a strictly realist telling of it.
Yeah, I love that. And I come from a Latinx culture as well. I'm Mexican American and grew up on the Southern California border by Mexicali. And so my experience was often magical in many ways. I grew up in Catholicism, and so miracles happen. Angels and demons are real, and there are ghosts, and there are presences, that are inexplicable. And so magical realism for me follows the trajectory of Mexican magical realism, in that this is just a part of everyday experience. And so this really is my reality. And I get that sense from your work too. I was wondering if you would touch a little bit on your background as well, and how that might inform your writing, the magical and the speculative.
Yeah, I would say, that feels very similar to me. Like the way that you described growing up, that is how I would describe it. I would go over by my grandmother's house all the time, and I would play with the neighborhood kids after school, and there was a place that we would go up to. There was a just another neighbor up the hill that would sell like candies and specials and all that stuff to the neighborhood kids, and we would play, and then we would decide we wanted specials. They're like they're like little juice cups that you freeze and then you suck on. And we would decide we want those, and then we would run up the hill to the place, buy the stuff, and then come back down. But on the way, there was this house that looked abandoned the entire time that I went to visit my grandmother. And the neighborhood story, the community story, was that the Cowfoot lady lived in that house, right? And this is like a Caribbean, this is from Caribbean folklore. And so every time we would run up the hill, we would run real fast past the house so that the Cowfoot lady wouldn't catch us. And then we would get our specials, come back down, have normal conversations, be kids, and then run past the house again to go back down to go play. And that to me captures the way that the fantastic interacts with the normal in the Caribbean. Like, say, there's so many things like that where my family members would tell me a ghost story, and it would not be, this is a ghost story. It would be like, don't answer when someone whispers your name at night, kind of thing. You know what I mean? That it was taken very literally. It was real. And but there was a way that kind of lived side by side with all of the other stuff. It wasn't like a fixation or anything. It was just like, if you do this, so that you neutralize this presence, or if you see what was it? If you, everyone has like the throw the salt over their shoulder, but the whispering your name at night is the one that I remember vividly. And then my aunt would tell me stories about like woo-woos in power outages. The woo-woo in the book is inspired by a story that my aunt told me when I was a kid. It's like the way that I describe it, based off the story, it's a Caribbean werewolf, and then we have sucuyants and all of these other creatures, and it's very baked into the culture in a way that I feel like there isn't necessarily a question about whether or not it's real. It just exists, and you go on with your life and you just keep one eye on it, is the way that I would describe it. And so bringing that into my fiction has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, that resonates so much. My mom is in the audience and she just mentioned like La Llorona, who's a major figure in my writing as well. And we grew up, like I said, on the border and right next to the New River, which would flow from Mexicali into Calexico and then into the Imperial Valley where I grew up. And so we would run down the hill and like past the palm trees and everything. And La Llorona was at the river. And so, but to get to the park, you had to cross over the bridge that was on the New River. And so it was very much like that as well. And then, you know, to get to the donut shop that was open 24 hours, you'd have to go through the alley, you know, but then there's the New River on the other side. So you just kind of, you're with your friends, but you just have to run through it because La Llorona is there, right? And so I absolutely like can connect with so much of what you're saying. And thank you, Mom, for being here and for bringing up La Llorona.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so similar.
It's so similar, yeah. And I was gonna say thank you to my mom for not terrorizing with her. Because like a lot of parents too would use like the La Llorona, Chupacabra, whatever, like the El Cucuy, like it's gonna come to get you, like you know, like the boogeyman. But my mom is so scared of things like of ghosts and you know because they're scary, right? She would never torment us with that. And so I know some kids who grew up with their parents like torturing them about it, and my mom was never like that. And maybe that's why I don't feel scared of it. And so I can write about it, right? I feel like it's empowering to be able to explore all these facets of it. And it's because I really, like, there was some fun with my friends in being scared and the thrill, but I didn't really have an innate fear because, you know, I felt safe and secure in my mother's love and in the, you know, that I was protected in the house. And so, you know.
Oh, that's so real. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's my mom never used any of that stuff with us either, but my extended family members all the time. And I mean, sometimes it would just be a thing that happens frequently back home is sometimes it's because it's storming. Sometimes it's just because the power will go out, and to entertain ourselves, you know, I'd be hanging out with my cousins and we would just tell ghost stories. And, you know, all of those ghost stories would be tinged with some kind of Caribbean folklore. And sometimes I think it was to terrify us. Often I think it was just to pass the time and we just were morbid or something. I don't know why we told those kinds of stories, but it was that the woo-woo story that I heard once is so vivid in my mind that it's, you know, it completely influenced like a bunch of things in the book.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I love that we can connect with our cultural and metaphorical monsters and demons. So that's great. Hillary, I don't know, did we lose you? I'm like, we've been happily chatting here, but we would love to hear.
I'm still here. It doesn't look like we have any questions at this time. So you all are more than welcome to continue the conversation, or you can end it here. It is up to you.
Do you have any questions?
I have a question. So you write both poetry and fiction, and I was just wondering if there's a difference in process or approach between those two things, and if you could talk a bit about that, like what is challenging, and in what ways are they challenging in different ways?
Oh, that's a great question. Thanks. So I've been writing poetry my whole life, and I think it's just how I think and feel and experience the world is through. And what I've realized is that my memory and my thought processing is a little bit more fragmented than other people when I talk to them about the kinds of memories that they have from childhood. And they can tell these kind of long stories, and I tend to think in flashes, right? And so I have just like image and sound and smell. And so then I have to string them together in order to make a kind of a coherent narrative. That's just how my brain processes. And so poetry has always flowed just naturally, like through my blood, right? And that's who I am as a poet. But I also have some stories that need to be told in a longer format, like through the novel, like Jubilee, right? Because her story was more involved and more complex, and I needed to tell it from more points of view. And I didn't feel like I was going to do it justice with the fragments, right? I really wanted to dig in. But so I had to teach myself how to write. And I mean, I've read like 10 books about plot and, the hero's journey and the narrative structure. Whereas poetry, yes, I have learned my craft and improved my craft, but it always came naturally. Whereas with fiction, I have had to learn to work in a longer form. And so, what I read tonight, for instance, like in a way that felt complete to me, like that was it. That was what I wanted to say. But I had to figure out, okay, how do I actually sustain another 300 pages? And so what I ended up doing was the first initial flash that comes to me, that is like the premise of my book. And then I really do have to plan it out. And so I keep a journal, like I always have a journal next to me. This one was for my most recent River Woman, River Demon, and the whole thing is full because I had to like take all the poems and write them down, and then I could type them into a book. So it's almost like I have to process through poetry first, through lyric, and like see it as these flashes. And then now I have the lexicon to build the world. Does that make sense?
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That is so cool.
How about you? Tell me a little bit about your writing process.
It's all over the place. I tend to, I feel like, in some ways it's similar. I'm definitely not a poet. I've dabbled.
Really lyrical though. Your writing is beautiful and lyrical. So
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I've dabbled, but when I look back at those things, I'm like, ugh, oh my gosh. No, you can't find any of them anymore. But I tend to think in, or I tend to, go in the drafting process where I can see. So like where things are vivid, what you said about like sensory detail speaks to me because I tend to land where I can see the most. And then I sit there and then I build. And then I sometimes use that to pull myself into another place in the story, or I'll land in another place that I find that is vivid. And my drafting process is a bit messy because it's I have a sense of what the plot is already, but I'm not pinning all the things down yet. And so a lot of it is just kind of like finding the right stuff and the things that are speaking to me and the things that I'm trying to do, and then making connections across them, and then building out from there and building and deepening the world so that those things stand on really good legs. Recently, because I've been on deadlines, I've had to do a lot more plotting. So I have outlines, I outline, but I do try to, when I outline and it's mostly plot and some thematic stuff and some character stuff. I try to, leave it very general, give myself some space, and there's some drifting that happens as I'm writing. But I do find that, the outlining has done some good. It gets me to those places that I see more quickly, even if I change them as I go.
I love that. I love the freedom of changing as you go and getting into that vivid place. And do your characters talk to you? Because I love how you said like the story unfolds before you. And I feel like my characters will tell, like I'll think the story's going a certain way, but then someone will just pop in and say something. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're going here.
Yeah, I've been working on this third book, as I said, and right now it's in a really good place. And one of the things that's been surprising is just that things are just happening that makes so much sense, but I wasn't thinking about it before. Characters are like, and there's this particular moment where a character does something, and that character, up until the point that I was working with them in scene, I knew the characteristics of them. I knew who they were. I knew the role that they were playing in the story, but I didn't understand all the depths of the layers of them. And then they show up with all of these layers, and then they do something. They did something with so much intention that, is big and radically changes the book, but it makes sense on a character level. And I was like really surprised by that. And it was one of those characters that I was like, this character is, generically bad, but now the character is beautifully gray. And I feel like that fits a lot of the other characters that have been all the other characters that I've been working with. There are some people that are doing some bad stuff in the trilogy, but I was very excited to see this particular character doing a bad thing, but doing it in a way that I felt was like rich and layered and not just mustache twirly, which is a thing that I would say the characters speak when they're revealing to me who they actually are and not what I think they are and what they're doing in the story. They're like,
Yeah.
well, I'm actually like this, and this is what I'm doing, and this is why I'm doing it.
Oh, I love that. Something you said too reminded me of one of my favorite Robert Frost quotes that I carry with me. It's a poetry quote, but I think it applies to storytelling in any kind, which is no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. And that a poem should melt. It's like a piece of ice on a hot stove, and a poem should ride its own melting. And I love that,
that's
right?
beautiful.
And so it's like, yeah, and that's how I think of storytelling as well, that I'll think that it's going a certain way, right? But then the characters or the story unfolding before me surprises me in some way. And I think that's when the story really becomes rich, right? For the and for the reader. So I don't usually even if I have a sense of how it's going to end, right? It's usually different in a lot of ways. Like I'll think that I have another chapter to write, and then I realize oh my gosh. And I kind of look around, am I done? Like, did I just finish this? Because I had this whole plan, but the story had another plan.
That's lovely. I love that. Yeah, I know, I've been thinking a lot about the overarching plot of the trilogy, and I know exactly how the last scene is gonna go. But I haven't been writing it because I think that when I actually get there, I think it's gonna be different. And so I'm leaving room, but it's one of those things where, you make all of these plans and you think all of these things and you're like, this is how this is gonna work. And sometimes when you have your hands in it, your subconscious or your characters or some bit of something surprises you. And you just, I think it's important, at least for my process, to kind of go with those kind of things and let those things kind of happen. And it speaks back to what you were saying about taking risks. Like a lot of the decisions I made as I was plotting, and then as I was writing, I was like, this needs to happen, and then I would try it, and I was like, okay, well, this is how it needs to be now because this is what makes sense for the story. Yeah.
I like to think of it as magic too. I really do. It is the subconscious, but I think the subconscious is magic.
I like that too. Yeah, that feels right to me.
I think maybe let's end there actually on the magic of the subconscious.
Was there any questions? Did any questions come in?
We didn't have a question, but we did have a statement from Alicia Bashaw, who I'm actually hosting pretty soon for Book Bar as well, for her book. Thank you both so much for sharing your amazing talents and minds with us. Loved it, Cadwell. It's so great to see you, and I'm just thrilled to see how your love of storytelling from back in the BYP days has evolved for you into such magic.
Hey, friend. Thank you so much. And congratulations for your book. I was so excited to hear about the work that you've been doing. And surprised, we need to talk about it. Okay, I'll stop.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone again for attending tonight. This was such a beautiful reading with such gorgeous language and words, and I'm just so happy for you both. Again, congrats, both of you, on your books. Again, you can buy them at Book Bar. You can come in. They are on display in the middle of the store at the prime location right there. Or you can order them online, of course. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Cadwell, for coming tonight. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Monique, for joining, and for supporting authors in general. Thank you. It's great that we all can come together like this, even if it is over Zoom, but it was such a beautiful reading. Thank you both. And have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your book tour.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Have a good night, y'all.